So you thought we're done with this graph. We're not. And in this video, we will have to deal with the unconscious. And for that, we begin with the barred subject. Now, you may be wondering where desire is located in all of this. Because this is supposedly the Lacanian graphs of desire. And desire appears to have no position at all, especially if you recall what we did with the previous video. And today, that's also part of um, the topic. So we begin with the barred subject. Now, the barred subject is split between certainty of the things that you know and uncertainty in the things that you do not know. Somehow, because of this uncertainty, there is a sense of loss. That's one thing. Now, graphically speaking, the barred subject is very much related to desire. The logic of the barred subject and desire is that because you feel a certain degree of loss, you also feel that you need to get it back. The idea that something was lost from you, something was taken from you. And last time I said this feeling, this anxiety of thinking that because I am thrown into the world, a world in which it is so vast, I don't know what to do, that there is something lacking in me that makes me not that effective in the beginning. So the question of the hysteric, the question of where am I to position in this world, comes in from that very spirit, from that very sense of loss. It's more like when you say, I am so lost right now. And if you feel like you lost something, you need, you also have the feeling to get it back. I think I mentioned before expressions like soul searching, trying to figure out yourself, try to figure out your soul. I said, you didn't really lost anything. And Lacan would say, or would add something like, well, you didn't lose anything because you never had it in the first place. The meaning of life, the essence of life, a sense of purpose. We never had those. When we were born, as what Heidegger said, Dasein, we are just here. You're just thrown into the world. Whatever purpose, it doesn't matter. That's the idea. But somehow we feel like we lost something. And this feeling, or Heidegger would say, anxiety, that comes from too much caring for the world. You remember Zorga. This feeling will persist. And the most graphic way of showing this, the outcome of us becoming barred subject, the feeling of incompleteness that can never be completed, is I'll show you a painting by what was his name? Kazimir Malevich. This is perhaps his most famous painting, iconic as what Wikipedia is saying. This is a black square. This is all there is. Just a black square on a white canvas, I think. Or linen. Yeah, linen. Oil on linen. This is just a painting. It's a black square. And then we have the linen. Now, it's interesting what Malevich will say to this. These are his perceptions of his own painting, or at least what he claimed. So 11. Okay, this is coming from this book, if you want. Um, Here's what he said. The painting is from zero. In zero, that the true movement of being begins. I transform myself in the zero of form and emerge from nothing to creation. Now, if we take that expression quite literally, in which the ego emerge from this kind of nothingness and then proceeds with creation. The idea is, out of this sense of loss comes the power to create. That's literally what the barred subject is. It's not that because we are barred that we are crippled and therefore we don't have any meaning anymore and therefore we ought to die. No, it is precisely from this zero level of looking at where we must begin. It is from this zero level that creation literally comes. The white linen represents nothingness, but then the black square represents imagination, the imaginary. Inside that black square, who knows, it can be something. And I don't know if this is true, but if you look at the this part, now some researchers were able to study the black square, and there's a message underneath the black paint, and supposedly it's read "Battle of Negroes in a Dark Cave." Now, I don't know, today that may sound a bit racist, especially with the left trying to discipline everyone, but Battle of Negroes in a Dark Cave. You don't see it in the painting. That's precisely the point. You don't see it. Let the imagination flow. If everything is white, there would be it will be just white. But the darkness somehow makes it possible to imagine things. That may be Malevich's joke. This account says it was taken from a comic caption, originally translated as Negroes fighting in a cellar at night. You don't, because everyone's black, it's night. And in Malevich's message, it's in a cave, in a dark cave, so you don't really see them. All you see is darkness. It's precisely out of darkness that the white space is given context. Because of the black square, The space inframes the image. It's provided context. Now, in Lacanian psychoanalysis, this black square is actually, imagine it as a um, a remnant of something, a proof of something that was removed. So imagine if you have a white linen and then you cut out a black, or you cut out a square inside that linen. You took out the extra cloth and all you see is a black square. Where is this extra cloth? And this is where the barred subject comes in. We felt like the extra cloth that was taken out exists. It exists somewhere. If somebody will ask you, are you satisfied about your life? Even if you say yes, you know at the back of your head, you know that there's always something wrong. There's always something missing. And we see it all the time in our literature. Rich man, have it all, but lonely. Poor guy, may be happy, but don't have money. There's always something wrong. There's always something lacking. And that sense of loss characterizes the barred subject. But this is precisely how our imagination works. We imagine that something was taken from us. Whatever that thing is, it becomes the object cause of our desire. When we desire something, we're actually trying to fill this black square. Something is wrong inside of me. Something is lacking. I want to fill it up, but I don't know what was missing. That's the point. You don't know what was missing. You just feel like you miss something. And how did Lacan calls this object, this missing piece that we cannot explain, that we can only talk about in terms of metaphors or metonymy, in terms of a figurative language, in terms of poetry, perhaps, in terms of art. What is this object? Lacan calls it, and at some point, he also called it small object A. Calls it the small object A, and if you want to be fancy about it, you can use the original French. L'objet petit a. He calls it that. In many of his diagrams, whenever you say l'objet petit a, you're actually trying to express that which cannot be directly expressed. If we go back to the painting, what was missing here? What was taken from this spot? If we consider this one a whole piece of cloth and then we took away a portion of that cloth and some darkness gets revealed, what was that content? The cloth that we took, what was it all about? We felt like we are missing something here. And that in his writings, Lacan calls the small object A, or whenever you see in his diagrams a letter A, that's usually what it is. I'm not going to go into details as to how this uh, mag, magic with small object A began, this peculiar image. Uh, that would be a very long lecture about the Lacanian mirror stage, but uh, for us, it would be enough to say that what do you want to be in the future, what you are aiming at, what your objective is. It's usually you're searching for l'objet petit a, the small object A. You don't know what it is. You don't know what was missing. You just feel like something is missing. And you've been trying to figure that one all your life. And the act, even the act of thinking about it, of trying to reach for it, that act, that thinking, that, let's just say, exercise, is what you call desire. So, out of the barred subject, this feeling, that sense of loss, comes desire. As you enter culture, like last time we call this one the big other. As you enter culture, it's not just you desire, because if you begin to ask yourself what was missing inside of me, where will you get all your answers? Well, first, language. Well, the fact that you can ask yourself what is wrong with me, or what do I lack to be accepted in this family, what must I possess to be considered equal with some people. Once you have the language, it means it will be inscribed in you, and then you're part of culture now. Learning the language, knowing the language game, understanding the language game, understanding the relationship of this language within the socio cultural network that you are in, or culture in general. This is where you develop your desire. This link between the barred subject and your culture in general is literally the very thing that teaches you how to desire. Now, let me emphasize culture first. We already did this when we were talking about um who was that again? Selfish Gene, Richard Dawkins, about literally what we have uh, is culture is a very powerful um, aspect of living, so powerful that it eventually somehow determines how we view the world. And it is in that sense that desire in itself is actually shaped by culture. But there is something about culture that we need to look at. First and foremost, many of you probably feel that there are aspects of culture that you do not like, right? Things like there are established institutions, established set of behaviors, established mores, morality, uh, things like this is what you should do and this is what you should not do. and somehow you feel like something is taken away from you. This sense, this feeling that culture has become so repetitive and mundane that it took away your authenticity. And this is basically Heidegger all over again. Heidegger once thought that if you live with the they all the time, you will lose your authenticity. Now, this feeling is related to the bard subject, especially if you begin to develop idealistic desires, desires on what human relationships should be, what human relationships ought to be, and ought not to be. And then you will feel that there is a certain degree, take this one off, there is a certain degree of uneasiness. Is that almost gonna let me search? It's good. That there's a certain degree of uneasiness in culture. You also cannot explain what it is. Something it acts like it's not only that you feel that there's something wrong with you, you will eventually also feel that there's something wrong with culture itself, that there is something lacking within culture. And it's because of that, it is usually where this the critique of culture, uh, for example, emerge. Now, if you've heard, for example, of notions of alienation, which is in this graph the endpoint. When you begin to desire, the way you look at the world will be shaped by that desire. Consider it your horizon, right? And the thing with horizon is that you cannot catch the horizon. Derrida would say it's always deferred. It always moves. And this sense that it is always moving can lead us to look at culture as something like there must be something wrong with all of this because why can't I have what I desire? And the thing is, usually we define it as our quest towards happiness, our quest towards being successful. But what do we do with all of this? Out of our desire, out of our engagement with culture, and the coming and the emerging feeling of uneasiness in it, especially the repetitive aspect of culture. When I was doing my anthropology of tourism, uh, one of the usual explanation as to why people would go and travel to other places is to escape the mundane existence of everyday life. The repetition is excruciatingly boring, difficult, and painful. There's so much uneasiness in it that you want to escape, right? That's the idea. Culture is repetitive, and your desire will have, just like in the previous graph, especially in this position, your desire will have to learn from it and then adjust as you move along. And why is this arrow pointing to this uneasiness? Right? Because just like we said, desiring something. Here, this is not the object of desire. This is the object cause of desire. The object cause of desire is the objet petit. The object of desire can be anything that can represent the objet petit. Meaning, you can desire to be something else, to be something more, but even if, let's just say, you want to be summa cum laude, and you did it, you don't stop there. There's always going to be something more, this sense of loss, there's sense of something's wrong with me. Something, I think I should need to add something. That's the sense. Right? The idea that you're running towards the horizon is that you're being a barred subject meets with the object cause of desire. The way or the more you reach for this object cause of desire, the more it gets away. This is like Achilles trying to catch Hector, if you can recall your Iliad. Or this is something like an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, which is very appropriate in some sense, because there's no way that you can defeat the small object A. Right? The only way for it, let's just say, to achieve finality of all of this is to die. But what does culture have to say? That we desire something more, that we want to escape the cycle of culture, the repetition or this compulsion to repeat. We want to cure this uneasiness. We want to reach the horizon, so to speak. What does culture has to say? Simple. Joy and repeat. So as we pass through barred subjects that we are, as we pass through culture, notice eventually its repetitive nature, and then eventually looking back at it as there's something wrong with culture itself. Almost like a reflection of our being barred subject. Because there's something wrong with us, there's something also wrong with culture. And it is because of this that culture needs to tell us to enjoy and repeat. You'll never catch the horizon. Keep on desiring. This is the Nietzschean notion of embracing life itself. Enjoy, repeat. This is what the world is all about, because as I've said last time, this is the world. This arrow is the world. This is what the world is all about. But because we've already seen, let's just say, the failures of that world, or let's just say, because we have engaged in this world and we have measured it, and we have weighed it, and we have found it wanting. There is something wrong with it. Somehow within it we feel alienated. In order for me to catch up with that horizon, to get into that horizon, in order for me to get to fulfill, to literally to capture what it is the small object A is all about, culture must change. So there are two end products in this analysis. One, that at the bottom line, we will eventually feel alienation. And on the other hand, we keep on developing our ego. Because this is, let me use another color, this is ego. Now, there are always three, right? And I don't know if you've heard of the ego, the id, and the superego. I'm not going to run into the usual explanation of it. Let's just say that this kind of like forced instruction for us to enjoy and repeat within culture. This is like the superego junction. This idea that we should enjoy and repeat. This is the superego injunction. Now, the casual people who would interpret Freud's ego, id ego, and superego would say the superego is the morality principle, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not the morality principle. The superego is culture itself trying to send us a message to enjoy the repetition. That's the superego injunction. And you get this one all the time. Have you ever wondered why we keep on doing the same thing over and over again? And instead of criticizing the repetition, we always say, it's tradition. This is history. This is what, etc. etc. This is the point. This is the superego injunction. And sometimes we criticize, let's say, was it who said that we keep on repeating history because we didn't learn anything from it? Yeah, the point is that we keep on repeating history because we've always been enjoying the repetition. There's always a kind of orgasmic enjoyment that we feel within culture whenever we say, I'm doing something that was done before and this is part of my identity. This is the superego injunction. Enjoy, repeat. But at the end of that line, you will always say, wait a minute. Where am I in all of this repetition? Where am I in all of this? I'm doing things because they said. I'm behaving like this because they said. That is where the feeling of alienation begins. Now, where is the id in all of this? Well, here's the id. The id is not some super powerful spiritual entity, monstrous, whatever organism inside of you that lives and wants to get out the pleasure principle. Excuse me, the id is not the pleasure principle. In fact, it's beyond the pleasure principle. Id is the enjoyment of repetition to the point that you will keep on repeating a certain part of behavior within your culture without questioning the behavior. If you've watched the movie um, what was that one? Cloud Atlas. That movie keeps on saying you cannot go outside the natural order of things. Well, excuse me. Just like what Dawkins said, within culture there is no natural order of things. What we call the natural order of things is the id. It's normative behavior because we've been repeating something over and over and over and over again. It becomes truth, it becomes the norm, and it becomes the id. Sometimes you do it without even knowing why. So whenever someone tells me, "Oh, uh, people should behave like that because that's how people should behave naturally," no such thing. Right? What we consider natural behavior is the id. And what makes the id despicable is that there is in it the feeling of uneasiness in culture. That's why even Freud would consider the id destructive. The id is not instinct. There's no instinct in culture. Um, in some psychology classes or even psychoanalysis, uh, there are two kinds of instinct. Well, following from Freud, um, one is love, the other one is death. Life is life. Love is life creating. Well, death, of course, is destructive. But these are not instincts. These are developed within culture, like it or not. We cannot blame everything with nature. In fact, within biological nature, there's no such thing as death instinct. There's no such thing, which is weird. There's no death instinct. There's no such thing as death instinct because the id, it's not instinct. Um, Freud used actually another term. He said trib. Trib is not instinct. Trib for Freud is come on, drive. Trib is drive, basically the id. This is basically culture. Drive is always partially a death drive. It is, in some ways, there's always an aspect of drive that is anti the creative or against the creative forces of life. What do we mean by that? When you enter into the circuitry of the drive, right? Remember the small object A, we kept on chasing the small object A most of our lives. But we can never have it. As I've said before in the previous video, we can never be complete. So what did we do in the end? We ended up enjoying the chase. The chase became cultural. The chase became tradition. The chase became, let's just say, heritage. The change became historical. Or what Derrida would probably say, the enjoyment of the trace. That's the drive. You enter, as what Lacan would say, you enter into a circuit. If you're familiar with the racing circuit, especially NASCAR, you they would just revolve, revolve, revolve. into so many laps inside a circuit. That's what culture is all about. That's what the drive is all about. The reason why we say it's partially a death drive is because not because it's leading towards death. Yeah, everything here leads towards death. But the idea is life is always a creative force. Love is always a creative force. But when once you enter into the drive of culture, this trib, right, this circuit, your idea will be, why reinvent the wheel? Why would I live differently when there's already an instruction manual as to how am I supposed to live? Why should I want to create my own brand of happiness when it was fed to me by some authority? That's the idea. When you enter the circuitry of the drive of culture itself. And now you see why there's something wrong in this. This one leads to uneasiness. Uneasiness leads you to interpret culture differently. That interpretation leads you to the aspect called alienation. So, so what is this all about? All of this functions, operates within what you call the unconscious. This is the unconscious. Desire is unconscious. If you want, when you say you desire for something, you desire for an object, that object is a metaphor of the small object A. The small object A can never be expressed. All we can do is catch some of the metaphors of that object. It could be receiving a good grade in a subject. It could be getting accepted by your parents. It could be becoming a pride of your parents, or well, it could be something else. You don't know what was missing in you. All you have are metaphors and metonymies. As I've said, language, signifiers that will play the role as a stand-in for the missing small object A. And all of this functions in the unconscious. So, that's basically what this is all about. All you have to do, if you really want to see the complications of this, is just relate this figure with what's that? This one here, right? This is culture, id, the drive, trib, that literally gives you the feeling of uneasiness. This one. This symbol actually means somehow you figure out that there is something wrong with culture. A here is barred, just like the subject is barred. You feel like culture itself is barred. There's something lacking in it. But culture always tells us to enjoy and repeat. This is the superego. Jouissance. Jouissance is beyond the pleasure principle. Its idea is to enjoy even in the greatest amount of pain. That's why we say, oh, sometimes you romanticize poverty and say it's normal as long as you're happy, just be happy. That's basically it. That's jouissance. You convince yourself that all of this is normal. That the class struggle is normal. That's a different story. Okay? And of course, the product is castration with Lacan. But here, just simplify it. The feeling that you're being alienated from all of this. a sense you're castrated. Something is lost from you. It's redoubled. It's not only that you are barred subject, it's redoubled. The voice that comes out is the voice of castration. This is why here it does appear to be, well, this is conscious life. You write, you explain, you say something, but then in the unconscious level, you may be saying something more. The castrated side of you, the sense of loss that you feel. And of course, D is for Lacan's desire. And then this one, this horizon that we speak of, is Lacan's way of saying fantasy. When we are affected by the affects of culture, our desire gets to reshape itself. And this continuous reshaping of changing the objet petit into something different. That, oh, I already accomplished letter A, I must then accomplish letter B, and then I must accomplish letter C. It's probably why Lacan used the small letter A, because that's where it all began. That's where it starts. Or, just like what the painter said, this is where the zero level of creativity begins. This, the barred subject, trying to catch up and get, you look at this symbol, try to get the objet petit a, but the objet petit a tries to resist being taken. This is the Lacanian formula for fantasy. This is the horizon. This is us trying to catch the objet petit a, and this is the objet petit a trying to resist us. This feeling leads to this feeling of uneasiness in culture, resulting into our own interpretation of what culture is all about, and the feeling that there's something wrong with it makes us see culture rather differently, makes us see culture in its repeating cycle. Then, of course, bottom line, we produce the ego. So the ego is always something like a product of our imaginary, right? But this is imaginary already mediated by the symbolic, by the big other, by culture, by the demand, by drive, by desire. Right? It's already being shaped. And again, I repeat, the ego always change. It's not the fixed point from which you can find strength in the days when everything is dark. What did Nietzsche say? Just stare at the abyss. That's the idea. So this is the conscious part. This is the unconscious. Now, if you look at the shape, it's very much the same. Okay? The logic is basically the same. That's why I presented it this way, so that you can see the common denominators in all of this. You have the barred subject interacting with the big other, causing us to change some things about how we view the world. The big other trying to tell us everything's normal, you have to enjoy and repeat, etc., etc. You have our desire trying to catch something that can never be caught, leading us to, again, feelings of uneasiness within the big other. We find out that the big other actually also, just like us, is lacking. And then because of that, we always change the way we view ourselves. We always change the way we look at ourselves. So this is, for Lacan, the unconscious. So where is the unconscious operating? Is it something like us? Something inside of us? Like this? Is the unconscious something that is inside of us for Lacan and for all the remaining videos? No, it's not. The unconscious is out there. It's not some monster that needs to be deciphered. It needs to be hidden. Like for this one. This one comes from Simply Psychology. It explains here the id is part of the unconscious mind, and well, that's basically true. What we did with our new graph, but then it comprises the two instincts, eros and thanatos. Eros here being the life force, love; thanatos here being death. These are not instincts. The way we define life and what it ought to be is indeed part of the id, but not in this sense, because all of this is cultural. Death drive, life drive, or sex drive, all of this are cultural. Because, well, just like what we said last time, no, there's no such thing as sexual relations. So it's not an iceberg. It is culture itself. That's the idea. So next, um, the next video I think will be the last of the foundational literacy videos. Now, foundational literacy videos, if you have looked at how I arrange these videos in the playlists, foundational literacy videos these are concepts, ideas, like all of this written here, that I will be repeating over and over again when I will be doing videos on philosophies, on history, some of these ideas and concepts, all of that. So next time I will be probably looking at some vocabularies, but most of the things that I need for any of you to understand, um, it's already here anyway. So, well, anyway, let's see. That's it for now. See you in the next video.